The cameras were rolling. The audience was laughing. The game was at its peak. And then Steve Harvey did something he had never done in 40 years of television. He walked off stage mid-show, tears streaming down his face, unable to speak. What his daughter said next would break every heart in that studio, and millions watching at home. It was supposed to be a normal Family Feud taping. The Johnson family versus the Martinez family, competing for $20,000. Standard questions, standard laughs, standard Steve Harvey magic. But nothing about this day would be standard. The Johnsons had won the first round. Steve was doing his usual banter, making jokes about their answers, getting the audience going. Everything was perfect. Then he asked the bonus question that would change everything. Name something your father taught you that you'll never forget. Sarah Johnson, a 24-year-old graduate student, stepped up to the microphone. She was the youngest of the Johnson family, quiet throughout most of the game. Steve expected a funny answer, maybe how to drive, or how to grill, or something that would get laughs. But when Sarah opened her mouth, the entire studio froze. He taught me. Sarah's voice cracked. She paused, fighting back tears. He taught me that no matter how dark it gets, someone will always hold your hand. Steve's smile faded. Something in her voice, something in her eyes told him this wasn't a game show answer anymore. This was something else entirely. Tell me more about that, Steve said softly, stepping closer. The producers in the booth were signaling to keep moving, but Steve ignored them completely. Sarah's mother, standing at the family podium, put her hand over her mouth. Her father looked down, shoulders shaking. My little sister Emily. Sarah could barely get the words out. She passed away 3 years ago. She was only 9. Leukemia. The audience went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop in that studio. During her last 6 months, Sarah continued, her voice breaking with every word. She was so scared. Especially at night. She didn't want to be alone. She was afraid of leaving us. Steve stepped even closer now, completely off his mark, ignoring every camera angle, every producer signal, every rule of television. And my dad. Sarah looked at her father, who was openly weeping now. Every single night for 6 months, he slept in a chair next to her hospital bed. He held her hand from the moment the sun went down until it came back up. Every single night. Steve Harvey, the man who had hosted thousands of shows, who never broke character, who always had a joke ready, Steve Harvey was crying. One night. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper now, but the microphones caught every word. Emily woke up at 3 a.m. She was so weak. She looked at my dad and said, Daddy, what if you get tired and let go? And you know what he told her? The entire studio held its breath. He said, Baby girl, I will never let go of your hand. Not tonight, not tomorrow, not ever. Even when I can't hold it anymore, I'll still be holding it. That's when Steve Harvey broke. He walked straight past the podiums, past the game board, directly to Sarah. He wrapped his arms around her and just held her while she sobbed into his shoulder. The cameras kept rolling, but this wasn't television anymore. This was human. I'm so sorry, Steve whispered, his own tears falling freely. I'm so sorry. The Martinez family, the opposing team, left their podium and came to embrace the Johnsons. The audience stood as one, not clapping, just standing in solidarity with this family's grief. But nobody knew what Steve Harvey did next. He stopped the taping completely. Cut cameras, he said, his voice raw. The producers were shocked. You don't stop in the middle of a show. But Steve didn't care. He looked at Sarah's father, a man named Robert Johnson who hadn't spoken all game, who had let his wife and kids do the talking while he stood quietly at the end of the podium. Sir, Steve said, walking over to him. Can I talk to you for a second? Robert nodded, unable to speak. Steve took off his suit jacket, the expensive, perfectly tailored jacket he wore on every show, and handed it to Robert. I want you to have this, Steve said. And I want you to know something. The studio was so quiet you could hear people breathing. I'm a father too, Steve continued, his voice shaking. And what you did for Emily. Holding her hand every night, never letting her be afraid. That's not just being a father. That's being everything a human being should be. Robert broke down completely. This man who had held himself together through his daughter's death, through 3 years of grief, through standing on national television, he shattered. Steve caught him. Literally held him up as this father sobbed into his shoulder. You didn't let go. Steve kept repeating. You didn't let go. She knew. She knew you'd never let go. Behind the scenes, every crew member was crying. The producers weren't calling to restart. They were just human beings witnessing something sacred. After what felt like forever but was probably only 5 minutes, Steve finally composed himself enough to speak to the audience. I've been doing television for 40 years, he said, his voice still thick with emotion. I've met presidents, celebrities, millionaires. But I have never, and I mean never, met a man who embodies what it means to be a father more than Robert Johnson. The audience erupted. Not in applause, in a standing ovation that lasted 4 full minutes. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. When they finally resumed taping an hour later, Steve made an announcement that shocked everyone. The prize money for this game is $20,000, he said. But I'm adding $100,000 of my own money. The Johnson family is walking out of here with $120,000 today. The audience gasped. The Johnsons collapsed into each other, sobbing. And that's not all. Steve continued. I'm partnering with St. Jude Children's Research Hospital to create the Emily Johnson Memorial Fund. Every penny donated will go to families who need to stay with their sick children, so no child ever has to be alone at night. But nobody, not the audience, not the viewers at home, knew about the conversation that happened after the cameras stopped rolling. Steve took Robert aside, away from everyone. I need to tell you something, Steve said. When I was young, my father left. Just left. I spent my whole childhood wondering what it would have been like to have a dad who stayed, who showed up, who held on. Robert listened, tears still streaming down his face. You gave Emily something I never had, Steve continued. You gave her the certainty that she was loved, that she wasn't alone, that her father would never abandon her. Even in death, she wasn't alone. Because you held on. Steve pulled out his wallet and handed Robert a business card. This is my personal number, he said. Not my agent, not my manager. Me. If you ever need anything, and I mean anything, you call me. Because what you did for Emily is what every father should do, but so few actually do. You're my hero, Robert. That business card would change both their lives forever. Over the next 3 years, Steve and Robert stayed in close contact. Steve attended the first Emily Johnson Memorial fundraiser. He spoke at Sarah's graduate school graduation. He sent flowers on the anniversary of Emily's passing. But more than that, Robert's story changed Steve. In interviews after that episode aired, Steve would frequently bring up Robert Johnson. That man taught me what it means to hold on, he would say. In a world where people let go so easily, of commitments, of promises, of people, Robert Johnson held on. That's legacy. That's love. The episode itself became the most watched Family Feud episode in history. Over 50 million people watched it within the first week. It went viral across every platform. But unlike most viral content, this wasn't about shock value or humor. It was about witnessing authentic human connection at a time when the world desperately needed it. Comments flooded in from around the world. I lost my daughter to cancer. Seeing Robert Johnson made me feel seen for the first time in years. I'm not even a father, but this made me want to be a better human being. Steve Harvey showed us that humanity matters more than television. And the Emily Johnson Memorial Fund? In 3 years, it raised over $12 million. Hundreds of families received grants to stay with their sick children. Hospital rooms were renovated to include beds for parents. Night nurses were hired specifically to support families during the darkest hours. All because one father held his daughter's hand. All because Steve Harvey stopped being a television host and became a human being. All because Sarah Johnson had the courage to speak a truth that broke everyone's heart, and then healed them. 5 years later, Steve Harvey returned to that hospital where Emily had spent her final months. He walked through the new wing that had been built with fund money, the Emily Johnson Memorial Children's Wing. Parents sat in comfortable chairs next to their children's beds. Nobody was sleeping alone. Nobody was scared in the darkness. Steve stood in the hallway, looking at a plaque on the wall. In memory of Emily Johnson. Her father never let go of her hand. May every child here know they are never alone. A nurse approached him. Are you Steve Harvey? He nodded, wiping his eyes. Thank you, she said simply. Because of what you did, because of what you helped create. I watched a father last night hold his son's hand through a terrible seizure. And when it was over, the little boy said, "Daddy, you held on." He knew about Emily's story. He knew that fathers hold on. Steve Harvey broke down again, right there in that hospital hallway. Because he understood something that day in the Family Feud studio, something that had taken him 40 years to learn. The greatest power we have isn't making people laugh. It's making people feel less alone. Robert Johnson taught him that. Emily Johnson taught him that. And now, every time Steve walks on that stage, he carries their story with him. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. The suit jacket Steve gave to Robert that day? Robert framed it. It hangs in their living room with a photo of Emily underneath it. But more importantly, Robert started a foundation of his own. Holding Hands Foundation, that connects grieving parents with each other, creates support networks, provides counseling. Steve taught me that Emily's story didn't have to end with her death, Robert said in an interview years later. She can keep saving people. She can keep teaching people. Because of Steve, my daughter's life meant even more than I realized. And Sarah? The young woman who answered that question? She became a pediatric oncology nurse. She works in the Emily Johnson Memorial Children's Wing. Every night she walks through the rooms, making sure every child has someone holding their hand. Steve Harvey changed my family's life, she says. But more than that, he showed the world that it's okay to stop, to pause, to let humanity be more important than entertainment. This is Steve Harvey's real legacy. Not the jokes, not the ratings, not the fame. It's the moment he chose to be human over being a host. It's the moment he held a grieving father and said, "You didn't let go." Because sometimes the greatest thing we can do is simply hold on. To each other, to our promises, to love even when it hurts. Steve Harvey learned that from a father who sat in a hospital chair for 6 months. Emily Johnson learned that from a dad who never let go of her hand. And now millions of people around the world know it too. Because one game show host decided that compassion matters more than cameras. That's not just entertainment. That's humanity. That's legacy. That's love that never lets go. 10 years after that episode aired, something extraordinary happened. A young man named Marcus wrote to Steve Harvey. His letter was simple but devastating. "Mr. Harvey, I watched your episode with the Johnson family when I was 15. My little brother was dying of the same disease. I didn't know how to be there for him. Your show taught me. I held his hand every night until he passed. He wasn't scared. Because of you, because of Robert Johnson, my brother died knowing he wasn't alone." Steve read that letter on his radio show, crying openly. "This is why we do what we do," he said between tears. Not for ratings. Not for awards. For Marcus. For his brother. For every family that needs to know, you hold on. The ripple effect was immeasurable. Hospitals across America began implementing hand-holding programs, inspired by Robert's story. Medical schools added Emily's story to their curriculum about compassionate care. Father's support groups sprouted up in every major city, all tracing their inspiration back to that Family Feud episode. Robert Johnson received letters from over 10,000 fathers. Men who had felt alone in their grief. Men who didn't know if what they were doing mattered. Men who needed to hear, "Holding on is enough. Love is enough." "I never wanted to be famous," Robert said at a memorial event. "I just wanted to be Emily's dad. But Steve Harvey helped me understand that being Emily's dad could help other dads be better fathers. That's everything." And Steve never forgot the lesson. Before every Family Feud taping, Steve pauses. Just for a moment. He thinks about Emily, about Robert, about that jacket hanging in a living room in Ohio. He reminds himself, these aren't just contestants. They're humans with stories, with pain, with love that deserves to be honored. That's the real game. Not the answers on the board. The humanity in the room. Because a father taught him, you never let go.